Maybe it's just one of those days when everything goes wrong. You're ready to give up, your phone dead, your car keys lost, and then, out of nowhere, a stranger pulls up beside you. They roll down the window, their face calm but warm, and in the midst of this storm, they offer you a ride. You hesitate. Trust. On a day like today? But something about the offer feels different, almost comforting. They seem genuine. But as you climb into their car, the storm outside continues to rage, and little do you know, your world is about to be shaken in ways you never expected. This seemingly simple ride could lead to something entirely unexpected, something that will make you question fate, connection, and how strangers can suddenly alter the course of your life. By the end of this story, you'll understand why it's often the smallest choices that lead to the biggest moments. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why should I stay and listen? What's so special about this? But here's the thing. You clicked on this video for a reason. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's because you're a sucker for a good story, or maybe you just want to know where this is all going. And trust me, by the time you get to the end, you'll be glad you did. The twists, the turns, and the decisions that unfold are all things you won't see coming. This story, it's not just about two strangers meeting on a rainy day, it's about connection, timing, fate, and the beauty of taking a leap when everything inside you says don't. So, stay with me here. Let's build this story together. At the heart of it is one simple question. What happens when you take a chance on someone you don't know, when you open your heart to something that seems too good to be true? Can a fleeting moment of kindness change the trajectory of your life? Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll be rethinking every interaction you've ever had with a stranger. Let's get into the story. It all begins with Sarah, a woman whose life had been moving at a steady, predictable pace. Every day was the same: work, home, sleep, repeat. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that made her heart race or her mind wander. But that rainy evening, as she found herself standing outside her favorite coffee shop, waiting for the storm to pass, everything was about to change. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to take a very different turn. It's funny how life works sometimes, isn't it? You go about your day, thinking you're in control, thinking you know what's coming next, and then, just like that, a single moment, a single encounter, can change everything. Sarah had no way of knowing, as she stood there, wet and annoyed, that this would be one of those moments. It was like the universe conspired to bring two very different people together in a way that neither could have predicted. And the man in the car, offering her a ride, wasn't some random stranger, he was someone who, in that split second, could make all the difference in her life. But why was he offering? Was there something he wanted in return, or was it just a simple act of kindness? It was a question that would hang in the air, unanswered, until Sarah found out for herself. As Sarah climbed into the car, the rain hammering on the windows, she couldn't help but notice how calm and collected the man seemed. He didn't seem out of place in this storm. He was exactly the kind of person she had always imagined, but never quite met. His voice was warm, yet mysterious, and his eyes seemed to have a depth to them, like he had lived a life full of stories he wasn't yet ready to share. But he wasn't here to tell her about his past. No, he was here for something entirely different. Something that, at the time, didn't make sense, but would soon become the key to unraveling everything. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" he asked, his eyes flickering toward her. His question was simple, but Sarah immediately felt the weight of it. This wasn't just a question like "what's your favorite color?" or "where are you headed?" This was the beginning of something more, a challenge, an invitation, or maybe even a test. It was something that would slowly peel back the layers of her life and force her to confront decisions she had been avoiding for years. Sure, she replied, her voice sounding uncertain even to herself. "What do you want to ask?" He paused for a moment, almost as if he was measuring her response, considering how to approach what he was about to say. The rain splashed against the windows, but inside, the air seemed still, heavy with anticipation. "I know this might sound strange, but I've been watching you for a while now, and I wanted to ask if you would go out with me. On a date." Sarah blinked. Was this some kind of joke? She didn't even know this man. And yet, there was something about his voice, his presence, that made her think this wasn't a typical pickup line. There was sincerity there, but was it real? Or was this just the beginning of something far more complicated? Now, I know what you're probably thinking. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? And that's exactly the point of this story. It's not about the simple act of accepting a ride, it's about what happens after, the decision that unfolds next, and how a single question can set off a chain reaction that changes everything. You'll see soon enough that Sarah's answer isn't as straightforward as it seems. The rain, the timing, and the words exchanged in that car were the spark that would ignite a fire that neither of them could control. There's more to this story, much more, and you'll want to stick around for the twists and turns that come next. But here's the catch, you won't find out just yet. Not until we go deeper into this journey together. So, if you're ready to unravel the mystery, stick with me. Because, as Sarah would soon learn, sometimes the biggest surprises come when you least expect them, and sometimes, the ride can change your entire world. Stay tuned for part 2. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. As Sarah sat in the car, the rain continuing to pelt the windows with a steady, rhythmic pattern, her mind raced. This wasn't just a random moment. Nothing about it felt like an accident. She had been caught off guard, but now, the confusion started to turn into something else, curiosity, maybe even a flicker of hope. But that spark of intrigue came with a nagging unease, one she couldn't quite shake off. It wasn't just the stranger's sudden offer of a ride that unsettled her, it was everything that led her here. There had been a series of strange, disorienting events in her life recently, small shifts that, at the time, seemed insignificant, but now, with this unexpected encounter, she began to wonder if they all tied together somehow. Perhaps this man wasn't just a random passerby after all. Maybe he had been watching her long before she noticed him. Sarah wasn't one to put much stock in coincidences. She had always been practical, grounded, logical, the kind of person who made decisions carefully and without hesitation. But lately, things had been different. She had started to feel like something was off, like the life she had been living wasn't entirely hers to control. She couldn't pinpoint when it started, but it felt like the walls around her had been closing in, ever so slowly. Maybe it had begun with the breakdown of her relationship with Brad, her ex. They'd been together for 3 years before things fell apart. The breakup had been the kind of quiet, painful ending that never made the headlines but left its mark nonetheless. No cheating, no shouting matches, just the slow, inevitable drift. Brad had become distant, and she had followed suit, retreating into her own world where work, errands, and social obligations filled the space between the two of them. In the weeks that followed, Sarah buried herself in her job as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm. At first, it was a distraction, keeping busy, keeping her mind off the void that had been left in the wake of her failed relationship. But soon, the work itself became overwhelming. Deadlines piled up, emails stacked higher than she cared to admit, and her apartment, which had once been her sanctuary, began to feel more like a cage. The days blurred together, each one identical to the last, each one draining more of her energy. She had lost touch with her friends, stopped going out, stopped caring. All she wanted was to get through the day, to reach the weekend and find some kind of peace, but that peace never seemed to come. Instead, she'd found herself wandering around the city more often than usual, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching her. It was a feeling that had begun to grow stronger in the last few weeks, especially when she'd been walking home from work, or out for coffee, or waiting at the bus stop. She never saw anyone, but she felt eyes on her, lurking just outside her field of vision. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as paranoia, but it was getting harder to ignore. And then, there was the dream. The one she kept having, night after night, vivid and unsettling. In it, she was standing in a large, unfamiliar room, and no matter where she turned, there was a shadowy figure watching her. She couldn't make out the details, but she knew it was someone she should recognize. The feeling of dread in the dream was palpable, but when she woke up, the sense of being followed would stay with her throughout the day, as if the dream had bled into her reality. The dream felt like a warning, but from what? Or whom? She had tried to talk to a therapist about it once, but the session had felt hollow. The therapist had listened, nodded, and suggested that maybe she was still processing the breakup, that the dream was just a manifestation of her emotional turmoil. But Sarah didn't believe that. It felt too real. Too specific. The room in the dream wasn't just some random backdrop. She could almost smell the air, feel the temperature in the room, the way it chilled her skin. There was something in it that felt like it had meaning, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And then tonight. The rain. The man who had offered her a ride. It had felt like fate, like the universe was nudging her, pushing her into a new chapter, one she wasn't entirely ready for but couldn't avoid. As the car sped through the wet streets, she glanced over at the driver. His calm, almost serene demeanor contrasted sharply with the storm outside. Who was he? Why had he singled her out, of all people? His face was vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. He didn't seem to be in any hurry, almost as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her to answer his question, to decide whether or not to trust him. The longer she sat there, the more questions piled up in her mind. Why me? She finally asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car's engine. The man didn't answer right away. He seemed to take his time, as though he was considering her question carefully. She waited, her eyes searching his face for any hint of deception. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but cryptic. "It's not so much about you, Sarah," he said, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "It's about timing. You're at a crossroads. Life's been complicated for you lately, hasn't it?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't told him her name. She hadn't mentioned anything about her personal life. How did he know? Was this all just a coincidence, or was something deeper at play? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but the more she thought about it, the more unsettled she became. It wasn't just the man's words, it was his tone, his confidence. He knew something about her, something she hadn't shared with anyone. Was he following her? Had he been watching her for longer than she realized? "How do you know that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, a mix of suspicion and fear creeping into her tone. The man's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say, I've been paying attention." The car swerved slightly as they passed a turn, but Sarah hardly noticed. Her entire focus was now on him, on the mystery he represented. Who was he really? Why was he asking her out on a date, of all things? It didn't add up. And the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if this encounter had been planned all along. Just then, the car slowed, and they reached a stoplight. For a brief moment, everything felt still, too still. It was as if the entire world outside the car had paused, leaving just the two of them in a suspended moment of tension. And then, as if sensing her thoughts, the man finally broke the silence. "Look, I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly, his voice almost too calm. "But there's something you need to understand. You're in danger, Sarah. And if you don't listen to me, you might not get out of this storm alive." At that, Sarah froze. The tension in the car snapped like a taut wire, and the world outside seemed to close in on her. Was this a threat? Or was he trying to warn her about something she didn't understand yet? The mystery deepened, and her heart raced as she realized she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And she had no idea who she could trust anymore. Would she listen to him? Could she afford not to? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, as the car drove on into the night, and Sarah found herself caught in the web of a mystery she couldn't escape. "You said." As the car glided through the wet streets, Sarah's mind raced with the man's cryptic words. "You're in danger, Sarah." She couldn't stop replaying those words over and over, each time feeling a little more like they were meant for someone else, someone who had been pulled into a dangerous game. But as much as she tried to calm herself, to tell herself she was overthinking things, a sense of dread settled in her chest. The last thing she needed was to be pulled into another mystery, another drama she didn't ask for, but there was something about this that felt bigger than anything she could have imagined. He wasn't just talking about a random threat. He was talking about her. And for some reason, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything in her life, the strange feelings of being watched, the unsettling dreams, and now this strange encounter, was somehow tied together. As the car pulled up to a stoplight, Sarah glanced over at the man, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, danger?" she asked, her voice steadier now, but still edged with suspicion. She needed answers, but the more she pressed him, the more elusive they became. The man remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable as he tapped his fingers lightly on the steering wheel. It was as though he was debating whether to say more or to leave her with nothing but unanswered questions. "I can't explain it all right now," he finally said, his voice low, barely audible over the sound of the rain. "But if you dig too deep, if you keep pushing, things will only get worse. Trust me when I say that." His warning sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Worse? What did he mean by worse? The night had already taken a turn for the strange, but now it felt like she had stumbled onto something she wasn't meant to know, something that could cost her more than she was willing to pay. But Sarah wasn't one to back down. The moment someone told her not to do something, she wanted to do the opposite. And right now, the more this man held back, the more she was determined to uncover the truth. She had to know what he was hiding, what he wasn't telling her. The car's headlights flickered slightly, and for a brief moment, the man seemed to lose his composure. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. It was just a momentary lapse, but Sarah caught it, and it only fueled the growing sense that something wasn't right. This man had an agenda, and she was a part of it, whether she liked it or not. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like they were driving toward something she wasn't ready to face. And yet, she had no choice but to keep going. But just as she was about to ask him again about what he meant, the car suddenly slowed to a crawl. She looked up and saw a figure standing at the side of the road, a shadowy silhouette drenched in the downpour. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The figure was too familiar. The face, she recognized it. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision through the rain-streaked window. "Stop the car," she whispered urgently. The man driving didn't even hesitate. He slowed to a stop, his eyes flickering to the figure in the distance. Sarah strained to see better, trying to make out who it was, but the rain blurred everything. The figure stepped forward into the light, and Sarah gasped in shock. It was Brad. Her ex-boyfriend. The one she hadn't seen or heard from in weeks. He had been the last person she expected to appear tonight, especially in this bizarre situation. She watched him step closer, his drenched clothes clinging to him, his face obscured by the rain. But there was no mistaking it, she could see the faint outline of his familiar features, the same ones that once made her feel safe, but now made her feel uneasy. "Why is he here?" Sarah murmured, her voice barely audible. She had no idea what he was doing on this road, or how he had even found her. Her first instinct was to reach for the door handle and open it, but something told her to hesitate. Something wasn't right. The man beside her noticed her hesitation and immediately put his hand on the door lock. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he warned, his tone no longer calm but tinged with something else, something dangerous. "Why not?" Sarah demanded, turning toward him. "What is he doing here? What's going on?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly shifted his gaze to the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning the street behind them. There was something off about his expression, something that told her this was more than just a coincidence. Just as Sarah was about to say something else, Brad approached the car, his face suddenly visible in the light. But before Sarah could open the window or even ask him what he was doing, the man beside her spoke again, his voice low and urgent. "Don't talk to him. Whatever you do, don't let him in the car. He's not who you think he is." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. "He's not who you think he is." Her mind raced. What was he talking about? Brad was the last person who would ever cause her harm, right? He wasn't involved in anything strange. He had just disappeared. The breakup had been hard, sure, but she didn't think it had anything to do with anything dangerous. Had he been hiding something from her? Something she didn't know? The questions piled up so quickly that she couldn't keep up. Her gaze flickered back to Brad, but this time, her heart pounded in her chest. He was standing too still, too composed. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone. And just as she tried to process that thought, she caught sight of something in his hand. A small, silver object. A key. No. A flash drive. Her breath hitched. It was a flash drive, the kind that contained all the important information she had been working on at her job, information that had disappeared from her laptop a few days ago. The same information she had been searching for, the same files she had been asking about at work. No. This couldn't be real. Her thoughts scrambled, her mind unable to connect the dots fast enough. Why was Brad holding her missing files? Had he taken them? Had he been part of whatever was going on? Why was he here, and why was he so intent on keeping her from knowing the truth? The man beside her, his hand still on the door lock, let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. "I told you," he murmured. "You should have stopped digging." Before Sarah could react, Brad took another step closer, and something in his eyes made her blood run cold. She couldn't figure out if he was genuinely trying to warn her or if he was part of something far darker, but she could feel it in her bones. She was in deeper than she realized. The man beside her suddenly shifted in his seat, reaching for something hidden under the dashboard. He looked at Sarah, his expression unreadable. "Stay here. Don't open the door." But before Sarah could ask why, the world outside the car blurred in the rain. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye, another figure too fast to recognize. And in that moment, Sarah realized she was no longer in control of her own life. The storm outside, the mystery surrounding Brad, and the man who had offered her a ride were all part of something she hadn't even begun to understand. But there was one thing she was certain of now: she had to find the answers, no matter the cost. And just when she thought she might get a clue, the unthinkable happened. Brad's hand moved, and the flash drive disappeared from his grip, vanishing into the night. The pieces of the puzzle were slipping away, and Sarah knew she was running out of time. The rain had begun to pour harder, almost as if nature itself was trying to wash away the tangled mess that had become Sarah's life. She sat frozen in the car, her eyes locked on the spot where Brad had been standing just moments before, only now he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the darkness. The flash drive was gone too. It was all slipping through her fingers. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, to ask the man beside her what to do next, her phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced down, and for a fleeting second, hope flickered in her chest. Maybe it was something from her work, an email, a clue, something to tell her she wasn't completely out of control. But when she unlocked the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't an email from work. It was a text message, from an unknown number. "Stop. Before it's too late. I know what you did." Her fingers shook as she stared at the screen, the words searing into her mind. This was no ordinary warning. It was personal. It was meant for her. The strange, unsettling feeling that had been creeping up on her all night now felt like an avalanche, ready to bury her beneath the weight of it. Who was this? Another person trying to scare her off, to stop her from digging? The man in the car beside her, his calm, calculated demeanor still unnerving, glanced over at her. He must have seen the shock on her face. "Who's it from?" he asked, his voice low, almost too low. The kind of tone that made her feel like every word was calculated, every question part of a larger game she wasn't meant to understand. "It's just a text, from someone I don't know," Sarah replied, trying to sound calm, but even to her own ears, it came out shaky. She quickly turned the phone face down on her lap, but the words still echoed in her mind. "I know what you did." What was she being accused of? What had she done? She couldn't think of anything that would warrant such a message, not unless this was somehow tied to the strange events over the past few weeks, the feeling of being watched, the missing files, the cryptic words from the man in the car. As if on cue, a loud knock on the passenger window shattered the silence. Sarah jumped, her heart leaping in her chest. Her eyes flickered up to the figure standing outside the car. It was a woman, soaking wet, her expression tense, her posture rigid with urgency. Sarah's pulse quickened. She didn't recognize her, but the woman's gaze seemed strangely familiar, like she had seen her somewhere before. The woman's eyes locked onto Sarah's through the glass, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. She raised a hand, gesturing for Sarah to roll down the window. Sarah hesitated. Her mind screamed at her not to trust anyone, but the desperation in the woman's eyes made it hard to ignore. She glanced at the man in the driver's seat, who met her gaze with an unreadable look. Without a word, he reached across, turning off the engine. The car went quiet, save for the relentless sound of the rain beating against the windshield. "Do you know her?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond immediately, his eyes trained on the figure outside. His hand was still on the door handle, ready to stop her if she made a move toward the window. "I don't," he replied flatly. But you need to be careful. This is exactly what I warned you about. Sarah didn't know what to think. The woman outside continued to stare at her, waiting. Something in the intensity of the woman's gaze made Sarah's skin crawl, like there was something she was missing, some hidden motive just beneath the surface. She didn't want to roll down the window, but something urged her to do it anyway. Perhaps this was a new lead, perhaps it was a warning, or maybe it was just another piece of the twisted puzzle that had been rapidly falling apart around her. Slowly, Sarah reached for the door handle, glancing back at the man in the driver's seat. "I'll be right back," she said, though her voice was uncertain. She needed answers, and if this woman had anything to offer, she couldn't ignore it. As she opened the door, the cold rush of night air hit her, making her shiver. The woman didn't flinch, didn't step back, just stood there in the rain, her eyes fixed on Sarah. For a moment, the world around them seemed to blur into nothingness, the sound of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder the only things that remained clear. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the tension that was building inside her. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, Sarah's phone buzzed again. She glanced down and froze. Another text message. The same unknown number. "She's lying. You can't trust her. The truth is much darker than you think." Her heart pounded. She looked up at the woman, then back at her phone, wondering if the two were somehow connected. The message seemed too coincidental, too pointed. Was this woman lying? Was she part of some larger conspiracy, or was she trying to help Sarah see the truth? Before she could ask another question, the woman spoke. "You need to stop digging," the woman said urgently, her voice hushed but firm. "They'll come for you next if you don't. They've already made their move. You're already in too deep." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you talking about? Who are they?" The words tumbled out in a rush. "And what do you mean, next?" The woman took a step closer, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw something flicker in her eyes, something that made her question everything. Could she trust her? "Listen carefully," the woman whispered. "If you want to live, you need to get out of here now. Before it's too late." But before Sarah could respond, the car door behind her swung open, and she heard the man's voice. "Enough," he said sharply. "She's not listening to you. You need to leave. Now." The woman glanced back at him, her eyes narrowing. "You're just as deep in this as she is. You don't have the full picture." A tense silence fell between them. Sarah stood there, caught in the middle, unsure of who to trust. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a text message. The screen flashed with a call from an unknown number. She stared at the screen, torn between the woman in front of her, the mysterious man in the car, and the increasing sense that something was closing in on her. She answered the call without thinking, her voice shaky. "Hello." There was silence on the other end. A long, agonizing silence, until a low voice finally spoke, sending an icy chill down her spine. "You've been warned. Now, you have no choice." And just like that, the call ended. Sarah's heart raced in her chest as the weight of those words settled in. She wasn't just dealing with a random threat anymore. The stakes were higher, the danger more real than ever. She turned back to the car, her mind racing. The woman was gone, vanished into the rain, leaving only the echo of her warning in Sarah's mind. She looked at the man in the driver's seat, his face unreadable as he watched her. And that's when Sarah realized everyone around her had their own secrets. The truth was slipping further away with each passing moment, and the deeper she dug, the more twisted the web became. There was no escaping it now. The weight of the rain was almost unbearable, like a heavy blanket pressing down on Sarah, suffocating her thoughts. She stood there, drenched, with the phone still clutched in her hand, the unsettling words from the mysterious caller ringing in her ears. "You've been warned. Now, you have no choice." Her mind scrambled to make sense of it all, but there was nothing to hold on to, just an endless sea of unanswered questions, swirling around her like the storm that raged overhead. The woman was gone, vanished without a trace, and the man in the car hadn't moved. He watched her, eyes cold, calculating. There was no comfort in his gaze, no reassurance. Only silence. The phone buzzed again, and Sarah jumped, the sound of it startling her out of the fog of confusion. She looked down, half expecting it to be another cryptic message, but this time, it was an alert from her apartment security system. She frowned, her heart skipping a beat as she tapped the notification. The screen lit up with a live video feed from her front door camera. The image was dark, almost too blurry to make out, but she could just make out the silhouette of a figure standing on her doorstep. Her stomach dropped. The figure didn't move. She stared at the screen for what felt like forever, the panic rising in her chest like a tidal wave. Was it a delivery person? A neighbor? But there was something off about it. The way the figure stood there, still, unmoving, almost as if it was waiting for something. Or someone. Sarah's breath came faster as her eyes flicked to the side mirror, where she could just make out the reflection of her apartment building in the distance. She had to get back. She had to make sure everything was okay. "Let's go," Sarah said, her voice shaking, but the words sounded like they came from someone else, someone who had lost control of the situation long ago. The man in the driver's seat didn't respond. He simply started the engine, the sound of the car coming to life filling the air like an omen. He knew. He knew something was wrong. But as they drove, as the city blurred past them, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. She glanced over her shoulder, out the back window, but all she saw was the dark road stretching out behind them. Nothing. Her heart began to race, an instinctual dread crawling under her skin. Was she imagining things? Or was someone following them? She couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were closing in. That they were being watched, stalked. By the time they arrived at her building, Sarah's stomach was twisted in knots, and she could barely breathe. The moment the car rolled to a stop, she was out the door and running toward the entrance, her mind screaming with 100 different fears, 1,000 different scenarios. What if it's too late? As she neared the building, she stopped in her tracks. The front door was slightly ajar, just enough for her to see that something was wrong. The lock was broken. The small security camera above the door had been disabled, the red light no longer blinking. Her breath hitched as the enormity of what was happening crashed down on her. Someone had been here. Someone had broken into her apartment. She turned around, her eyes scanning the parking lot for the car, for the man, for anything that might offer some clue as to who was responsible. But the car was gone. She was alone now, standing in the middle of the street, and the weight of it all settled over her like a cold hand pressing against her chest. "Sarah," a voice called from behind her, and she spun around, her heart in her throat. It was Brad. Her ex-boyfriend's face was pale, his eyes wide with something she couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. But before she could speak, before she could demand answers, he raised his hand in a pleading gesture. "Listen, I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe me. They know everything. They know what you've been looking for, what you've uncovered." She shook her head, her mind spinning. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. This wasn't supposed to happen. "I don't know who they are," Sarah snapped, her voice breaking as the frustration and fear boiled over. "Who the hell are they? And why is everyone lying to me?" Brad's eyes flickered nervously toward the building, then back to her. "Because there's no way out of this, Sarah. There's no way to undo what's been done. They're watching you, they've been watching you for weeks. You can't trust anyone." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, Sarah just stood there, paralyzed. Brad. Part of it didn't make sense. She had loved him, once. Hadn't he been the one person who could never hurt her? But now, standing there with him, all she could see was someone who knew far more than he was letting on. Someone who was hiding something, and it wasn't just about their breakup. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat as she suddenly felt a cold, sharp sensation in the back of her mind. The fear, the dread, it was getting worse, like a pressure building in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Not just in the parking lot, but in the city. She wasn't alone in her own life. Brad's expression shifted, and he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You need to leave. Right now. Get out of here. They know where you are. They're going to come for you." Just as Sarah was about to respond, something caught her eye, a flash of movement from across the street. Her heart stopped. A figure, cloaked in shadow, standing behind a lamppost, watching them. It was too far to make out the details, but the way the figure stood there, motionless, sent a chill down her spine. "Brad," she whispered urgently, her voice cracking with fear. "Is someone?" Before she could finish her sentence, the figure stepped out of the shadows and into the light. It was a man. His face was obscured by a mask, but it wasn't a normal mask, it was plain, almost featureless, like something out of a nightmare. And in his hand, he held a gun. Sarah froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out, but her body refused to move. Her legs felt like they were cemented to the ground, her mind a swirl of panic and disbelief. Brad grabbed her arm, yanking her back toward the building. "Run," he shouted, his voice strained with urgency. "Now." But it was already too late. The man with the gun began walking toward them, his steps slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a random threat. This was real. Her heart thundered in her chest as she turned to flee, but in that moment, everything seemed to slow down, as if the world was conspiring to trap her. Brad's hand, still holding hers, tightened. And just as they reached the entrance, there was a loud crack, an ear-splitting sound that made her stomach lurch. A shot. The man had fired. The bullet ricocheted off the wall near her, narrowly missing her by inches, and she gasped, her body instinctively jerking back. They didn't have much time. The storm had intensified, the rain now a torrent, but Sarah knew the danger wasn't just outside. It was inside too. She had no idea who the man was, why he was here, or how deep this went, but one thing was clear, she was no longer in control. The questions piled up, and as Brad dragged her inside, the only thing that mattered now was getting away before the walls closed in on her completely. The room felt like it was closing in on Sarah, the air thick with a sense of inevitability that sent a shiver down her spine. The man behind the desk had just dropped the bombshell of a lifetime, and for a moment, Sarah could do nothing but stare at him, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. "You're not alone, Sarah." Those words echoed in her mind, mixing with the adrenaline that still pumped through her veins. But the longer she stood there, the more she realized just how little she knew, how completely trapped she was in a game far beyond her control. The man's smile never faltered, but it was the smile of someone who had already won, someone who knew exactly how this would play out. "You see, Sarah, this isn't just about uncovering some simple truth. It's about making a choice. And not just any choice, the kind that can tear everything you've ever known apart." Her throat tightened as his words sank in. It wasn't just the answers she was after anymore, it was survival. The longer she stayed here, the more she realized how deep the web had been spun, and just how far she had already fallen. The mystery she'd started unraveling was no longer just some twisted riddle, it was a battle for control over her own life, a fight between her desperation for the truth and the very real danger that it posed. Brad's presence next to her, once a comfort, now felt like a weight on her chest. She wanted to turn to him, to ask him why he was still standing by, silent, as if he had accepted this twisted fate. But every time she opened her mouth to speak, his eyes would flicker with something unreadable, and she couldn't tell if it was guilt, fear, or something darker entirely. He had been part of this, part of everything that had brought her here. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that his silence now was more than just complicity, it was fear. Fear of what they had done to her. Fear of what would happen to them all. "You know, you've always been a part of this, Brad," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, the words feeling foreign as they left her lips. She looked at him, but his face didn't betray any emotion. He didn't respond right away, just shifted his weight slightly, as if the question hadn't landed. Her throat burned with the need to understand. Why hadn't he told her? Why had he let her get caught up in this mess? But as she stared at him, the answer finally came to her. Brad had never been the hero in this story. He was just as much a part of the puzzle as she was, an unwilling participant who had already been pulled into the web. The man behind the desk, sensing the shift in the tension, leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface. "You see, Brad," he said casually, as if the two of them were part of some strange, sick game, "Sarah's not just a pawn. She's the key. She's been looking in all the wrong places, but now she's here, and she has a choice to make. She can either accept what's happened, what we've been planning all along, or she can try to fight us. Brad stiffened, his eyes flicking to Sarah, but before he could say anything, the man continued, his voice now a low murmur, like the calm before a storm. You, Sarah, have a decision to make. You've been digging too deep. You've found too much. And now, you have to decide, do you continue your search for the truth and risk everything, or do you walk away and protect yourself? But know this, if you walk away, you'll never be the same. You'll live the rest of your life knowing that you could have had everything, but chose nothing. And if you continue, well, you'll be buried deeper than you ever imagined. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind spinning with the impossible choice that was now placed before her. What did he mean by everything? What was the cost of continuing? Her thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. The tension in the room thickened as she tried to process the ultimatum. Brad's voice cut through her thoughts, raw with emotion. You don't understand, Sarah. You're not just up against them. You're up against everything we've worked for. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everything we've built. His words hit her like a slap, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of betrayal deep in her chest. Everything they'd built. What did he mean? She thought she knew Brad, thought she understood him, but now she was starting to question everything. The man behind the desk, the threats, the manipulations, had Brad known all along? Had he been a willing accomplice, or was he a victim, too? The room felt smaller now, the air stifling, as Sarah fought to keep her thoughts in check. She wanted answers. She needed to understand. But the more she heard, the more she felt the weight of the decision looming over her. The truth was no longer an abstract concept, it was a ticking time bomb. No matter what she did, no matter what choice she made, there would be consequences. The weight of it all bore down on her, and she felt the crushing pressure of the world closing in. The man behind the desk studied her with an almost clinical detachment, like he was watching a specimen in a lab. You've already seen too much, Sarah, he said softly, as if explaining something obvious. And you know the consequences of digging any deeper. But you also know there's no turning back. You can't unsee the truth. And I can promise you this, you'll never be able to live with yourself if you don't follow through. Her mind raced, her thoughts tangled in a mess of conflicting emotions. Did she have the strength to continue? Did she have the courage to face whatever lay on the other side of this twisted road? Or was she simply digging her own grave, inch by inch, every time she took a step forward? As if on cue, the man slid a small, unmarked envelope across the desk. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking between the envelope and his cold, calculating gaze. Inside, he said softly, you'll find your answer. You'll find out who you really are in all of this. And you'll find out what you're willing to sacrifice to get what you want. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the envelope. She didn't know what was inside. She didn't know what it would mean for her, for Brad, for anyone. But the moment her fingers brushed the paper, she realized that there was no turning back. Whatever came next, whatever choice she made, it was going to change everything. And deep down, she knew that once she opened that envelope, she wouldn't be the same person. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and Sarah realized, with terrifying clarity, that she might not be strong enough to face the truth, no matter what it cost her. As she tore open the envelope, the room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing in on her chest. The envelope was a revelation in itself, but not the kind Sarah had hoped for. As she unfolded the thick paper inside, her heart slammed into her ribs, and her breath caught in her throat. There was nothing written on it, no clear instruction, no message that could offer her any answers. Instead, there was just a single image, a grainy photo of a group of people gathered around a table. The faces were obscured by shadows, and there was one figure standing apart from the rest, someone who seemed oddly familiar. But it wasn't just the photo that froze her in place, it was the handwriting scrawled across the back of the photo. 3 simple words, trust no one. A chill ran down her spine as the words settled in her mind. Trust no one. It echoed in her thoughts like a death sentence, and the room around her seemed to close in as the weight of the message pressed harder and harder against her chest. She turned the photo over in her hands, the ink smeared slightly as if it had been hastily written, as if whoever had left it behind was desperate for Sarah to see it, to understand it. But what was it trying to tell her? Who were these people? What did they want? As she stared at the photo, she heard Brad's voice, low and strained, behind her. Sarah, we need to go. Now. It's too late. They're already here. The words hit her like a bucket of ice water. She whipped around to face him, her pulse racing as her eyes searched his face for any sign of what was really happening. There was no comfort in his eyes now, only fear, only panic. He was trembling slightly, and his usual calm demeanor had evaporated entirely. Something had shifted. Something was terribly wrong. What do you mean? She whispered, though she already feared she knew the answer. Brad didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the door, his grip painfully tight, almost frantic. There's no time to explain. Just move. Now. They rushed through the hallway, Brad guiding her through the twisting corridors of the building, his pace frantic as he kept glancing over his shoulder. The building felt different now. It was suffocating, its walls closing in on them, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the halls like a countdown. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant whisper of movement made her stomach tighten in fear. It wasn't just about the mystery anymore, it was about survival. And she was beginning to realize that everyone she had trusted, everyone she had turned to for help, had either betrayed her or was lying to her. When they reached the elevator, Brad hit the button to go down, but the doors remained stubbornly closed, the elevator stuck halfway between floors. Sarah's stomach churned. They knew they were coming. They knew we'd try to escape. The thought hit her like a ton of bricks. They were trapped. What the hell's going on, Brad? Sarah's voice cracked, her heart pounding in her chest. Who's coming? What do you know? Brad swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. His lips parted as if he was about to speak, but before he could, a sharp, sudden sound cut through the air like a door slamming open somewhere in the distance. Footsteps. Fast, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. Sarah froze, her blood running cold as the realization hit her. They weren't alone. Someone was here, and they were coming for them. Brad's face twisted with something between fear and regret. He stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the elevator doors. His voice was barely audible. I never meant for this to happen. I didn't know. I didn't know it would get this far. The truth hit her like a slap across the face. Brad had known. He had known everything from the start. The betrayal, the lies, everything, it was all unraveling before her. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't even a victim. He had been part of the conspiracy all along, working with the very people who had set this trap for her. Her heart raced. You're one of them, aren't you? She whispered, the words heavy with disbelief. Brad's silence confirmed it. He didn't deny it, didn't try to explain it. Instead, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable, the regret in his eyes flashing for a brief moment before it was replaced by something colder, something darker. He wasn't the person she thought he was. And now, there was no going back. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Sarah's pulse hammered in her throat as her mind scrambled for an escape plan. But before she could act, the elevator doors finally slid open with a harsh metallic clang. And that's when she saw them. 3 figures stood before her. Tall, imposing, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their movements swift and deliberate. The sight of them made Sarah's breath catch in her chest. These were no ordinary people, these were the ones pulling the strings, the ones behind everything. The ones who had been watching her every move. Move, one of them said, their voice cold and commanding. Brad took a hesitant step back, his eyes flicking nervously between Sarah and the figures in front of them. But Sarah wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. She had to fight. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. Who are you? She demanded, her voice shaking but strong. What do you want from me? The figure in the middle tilted their head slightly, as if amused by her question. We don't want anything from you, Sarah. Not anymore. You've already served your purpose. Sarah's mind reeled. Served your purpose? What does that mean? Before she could respond, the figure reached into their coat and pulled out a small device. They pressed a button, and the room suddenly filled with a sharp, high-pitched sound that made her head swim. She gasped, stumbling back, clutching her head as the world around her blurred. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sound stopped. Brad looked at her, his face pale. "We can't outrun them. They've been tracking us all along. There's nowhere to go. It's over, Sarah." Sarah couldn't comprehend what was happening. The stakes had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. There was no escape. The conspiracy was bigger than she had ever realized, and everyone she had trusted was part of it. Brad had known all along. The people in the shadows, the ones pulling the strings, she had been their pawn all this time. But the worst part, she still didn't know who was behind it all. And now, with every passing second, it was becoming clear that the truth wasn't something she could just uncover. It was something she might not survive. As the figures closed in on her, their eyes cold, calculating, and emotionless, Sarah realized the ultimate betrayal. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone she'd ever known. The room was suffocating, the air thick with tension as Sarah stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind a swirling mess of confusion, betrayal, and fear. The three figures in front of her loomed like shadows, their faces hidden in the dim light, their movements eerily synchronized. Every step they took was deliberate, calculated, as if they already knew how this would play out. She was cornered, trapped, and yet, there was a fire burning in her chest now, an unstoppable urge to fight back, to find the truth, no matter what it cost her. Brad stood behind her, his presence a constant reminder of the betrayal she had just uncovered. She could feel his eyes on her, but there was no comfort to be found in them now. His silence spoke volumes, a confession she couldn't unhear. He was part of this. He had known all along, and now, there was nothing she could do to change that. But the anger she felt toward him was overshadowed by something deeper, something darker, the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface of everything. These people, the ones standing before her, had manipulated them all, and Sarah was no longer willing to play their game. One of the figures stepped forward, their hood falling back just enough for Sarah to catch a glimpse of their face, a face she recognized, though it felt impossible. It was someone she had trusted, someone who had been in her life for longer than she cared to admit. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, and her breath caught in her throat. "No, it couldn't be. You," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You were behind all of this." The person didn't respond immediately. Instead, they looked at her with an expression of cold indifference, as if this revelation was nothing more than an afterthought. "You were always going to find out," they said, their voice smooth, controlled, almost soothing. "You were never meant to stay in the dark forever, Sarah. It's just unfortunate that you had to get so close." It took everything in Sarah not to step back. She felt the weight of the truth crashing down on her, the depth of the manipulation, the careful orchestration of every moment that had led her here. It wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a web, a carefully spun net that had ensnared everyone she knew. And now, she was standing at the center of it, the last piece of the puzzle, the final person who could either expose them or become their next victim. "I don't understand," she managed to say, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why? Why do all of this? What do you gain from destroying everything? What do you gain from making me a part of this?" Her thoughts were wild, a storm of confusion and desperation. She had trusted this person, had even relied on them, and now, the full weight of their betrayal was sinking in, like a stone in her stomach. What had she missed? What signs had she ignored? The figure tilted their head slightly, their lips curling into something that resembled a smile but lacked any warmth. "It's not about destruction, Sarah. It never was. It's about control. Power. Influence. You see, there are always people pulling the strings, people behind the scenes, and the truth is, you were never meant to see it. You were just a tool, a means to an end." Sarah's world spun. She had been a pawn. She had been manipulated, pushed into situations she never understood, led down a path that was carefully crafted for her from the very beginning. Everything, her investigation, her trust in people, her desire for answers, had been part of a much larger plan, one she had never even known existed. Suddenly, a thought struck her. A piece of information she had barely processed before, a small detail that seemed insignificant at the time. The photo. The one she had found earlier, the one that had seemed like such a strange clue. She grabbed it from her pocket, her hands shaking as she held it up to the figure in front of her. "This," she said, her voice gaining strength as the pieces fell into place. "This photo. You thought I wouldn't understand it, didn't you?" The figure's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough for Sarah to catch the subtle shift. They hadn't expected her to find it, not to put it all together. That was their mistake. The photo, the people gathered around the table, the handwriting. Trust no one. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. A warning from someone who had known the truth all along, someone who had tried to stop it before it was too late. "I figured it out," Sarah said, her voice low and steady now. "You were always a part of this. You are the conspiracy." The figure's eyes darkened, but they didn't deny it. Instead, they stepped closer, their presence a physical weight on Sarah's shoulders. "You think you understand everything now, don't you? But you don't, Sarah. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. This isn't something you can fix. You're not in control anymore. We are." In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The entire world felt like it had narrowed down to just her and this person, the person who had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. She had always been the center of this web, and now she was realizing just how deep it went. She was never meant to escape. But then, something unexpected happened. A sharp sound, like a crack of thunder, ripped through the air, and Sarah saw something that made her stomach drop. Brad, standing at her side, suddenly collapsed to the ground, his face contorted in pain. She turned to him in shock, but it was too late. He was gone. The figure in front of her didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of emotion. "You see, Sarah," they said, their voice cold, "your little friend never had the stomach for this. He couldn't follow through. It's just you now. And it's already too late." Sarah's heart raced, her body frozen in place as she realized what had just happened. Brad had been a part of this. He had betrayed her. But the shock of it all, the sudden loss of someone she had trusted, hit her harder than anything else. She turned to face the figure one last time, the truth finally setting in. It wasn't just the people she thought were behind it all. It wasn't just the secrets they had kept from her. It was her, too. She had been playing her part in a game that had been stacked against her from the very beginning. But she wasn't done. She couldn't be. With a sudden surge of strength, Sarah reached for the last thing she had left, her will to survive, her drive to expose the truth. She was no longer a pawn in their game. She was going to turn the tables. The figure's eyes narrowed as she took a step forward. "You can't stop us," they said, their voice low, threatening. "You never could." But Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't about to let them win. She was going to burn this whole thing to the ground, no matter what it cost her. With a final, defiant glare, she said the only thing that mattered now. "We'll see about that." And in that moment, everything changed. The battle wasn't over yet. The silence in the room was deafening, and for a moment, Sarah couldn't tell if she had won or lost. The figures that had once loomed so ominously now seemed distant, almost surreal, as if they were fading from her memory. It had all come to this, an unraveling of lies, betrayals, and manipulations. But what did she have to show for it? What was left after everything she'd fought for, after all the blood, sweat, and fear? She stood there, her body shaking, her mind a whirlwind of unanswered questions, but there was something else creeping into her chest, a sense of clarity. The puzzle had been pieced together, the lies exposed, but what had it all truly meant? Sarah looked down at Brad's still form, her mind struggling to reconcile the person she had once trusted with the reality of what he had become. There was a hollow pit in her stomach, but not for the reasons she'd expected. She had thought that this would feel like a victory, like a moment of triumph. Instead, all she felt was the weight of what had been lost. Trust, innocence, and the people she had once believed in, they were all gone now, consumed by the very forces she had spent so long trying to understand. But as she turned away from the scene, the finality of it all settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had exposed the conspiracy, had unmasked the shadows that had manipulated her life for so long, and now there was no one left to confront, no more truths to uncover. The last piece had fallen into place, and the pieces of her own life began to settle back into some semblance of order. The police had arrived shortly after, taking the remaining figures into custody, but Sarah knew the fight was far from over. She had only seen a fraction of what lay beneath the surface, the true scale of the operation, the many layers of deception that still remained hidden. She wasn't sure if she had the strength to face it all, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't just walk away. Not now. As the authorities closed in, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the scene, her back against a crumbling wall, the chaos of the moment drifting away. Her body ached, every muscle tired from the constant running, the fear, the heartbreak. But she had survived. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The truth had cost her more than she ever anticipated, but it had also freed her in ways she hadn't realized. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this mess months ago. The woman she was now had been forged by the fire of every lie, every betrayal, every close call. She wasn't naive anymore. She wasn't looking for answers. She had found them, or at least enough to understand that there would never be closure, not in the way she had hoped. Some things weren't meant to be fully understood, and some mysteries, no matter how much you dug, would remain buried. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence, and for a moment, Sarah thought about ignoring it. The last thing she wanted was another call, another person who needed something from her, another lie to uncover. But when she pulled it out, her breath caught in her throat. It was a message, but it wasn't from anyone she knew. The message read, "You think you've won? You haven't even scratched the surface. This isn't over." She stared at the words, the screen glowing in the dim light, and for a long moment, she felt a coldness crawl up her spine. The message was unsigned, the number unfamiliar, but the warning was unmistakable. There was more to this. More than she had uncovered, more than she had exposed. The conspiracy, the people pulling the strings, none of it had been as simple as she had hoped. She had learned a painful lesson. Sometimes, the things we uncover only lead us deeper into the abyss. There was no clear ending, no neatly wrapped-up conclusion. She had peeled back one layer of the truth, but she could already feel the tug of something darker just beneath the surface. The police officer who had been standing nearby approached her, his face weary but kind. "You did good, Sarah. We're going to make sure those responsible are held accountable. But, are you okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out across the cityscape, the lights flickering in the distance. The night had settled over the city like a blanket, and the hum of life continued, indifferent to everything she had just been through. The people who had orchestrated this, the ones who had manipulated her, were being taken away, their plans shattered. But something about it all still felt incomplete. Like a story that had been cut short, its true meaning lost in the spaces between the lines. She had faced the truth, but now she had to live with it. She had been through hell, but there was no real victory in that. No one could come out of this unscathed. I'm not sure," Sarah replied quietly, her voice almost lost in the wind. "But I think I will be. Eventually." The officer gave her a somber nod, as if he understood, and then walked away. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She could feel the weight of everything she had experienced, but she also felt something else, a faint spark of hope, a fragile thread pulling her forward. Maybe it was the hope that, in the end, the truth would matter, that all the pain and loss would somehow mean something. Maybe it was the understanding that she had done everything she could, that there was nothing left to fight. But as she turned to leave the scene, a cold breeze brushing her skin, one thought lingered in her mind. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a reminder. The conspiracy wasn't over. It would never be over. And as long as there were secrets to uncover, Sarah would keep searching, keep fighting, no matter how deep the darkness went. Because some truths weren't meant to be left buried, no matter the cost. The screen of her phone flickered again. Another message appeared: "See you soon." The smile that tugged at her lips wasn't one of victory. It was the smile of someone who knew, deep down, that this battle had been just the beginning. And for Sarah, that would be enough for now.